Joining me on the server this Sunday is Dr. Bernard Moore, the great-great-grandson of Tal Jones, a slave, the true story of discovery of oil on Tal's land, unscrupulous dealings by white oil men attempting to take the land and claim the mineral rights, and the family's fight to claim the land, and how 100 years later in 2021, Tal's family finally succeed. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are across the globe. Welcome to On the Sofa with Esther. Well, with me today, I have another incredible guest, all the way from the USA. And his name is Dr. Bernard Moore, Ph.D., political strategist, lecturer, and he has an incredible story to tell, one that's going to inspire you, but also one that takes us back through his ancestry, through DNA, but also back to slavery. But there's such an incredible outcome because of this, and I hope that this story will inspire you to keep going no matter what, and to, when you make a stake for what you believe in, you can keep going. So welcome, Dr. Bernard Moore.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm honored to be here to share my research, my family history, as well as my experience in genealogy. My academic and professional background: I am a former senior policy advisor for members of the Congressional Black Caucus in the U.S. House of Representatives.
I feel like I should do this.
And a professor at Howard University and Yale University, as well as New College at the University of Oxford.
Excellent, excellent. And you've got so much behind you, but that's also driving this particular subject that we're going to talk about today, which is incredibly important, and I believe it's going to be life-changing, not just for you, but probably socially, politically.
Yes.
Yeah. Culturally.
Basically, we're talking about a project that I'm working on, or projects that I'm working on, and that is Tal Jones, A Black Oil Legacy. It is a story about my family, my great-great-great-grandfather, who was born a slave in Texas. And he was also a sharecropper after the emancipation. And he left Texas and moved to Oklahoma and was a sharecropper there in central Oklahoma in a little town called Wewoka. And he was a sharecropper on a Seminole Indians land, which after the owner of the land passed away, his wife gave him 20 acres, land that wouldn't grow any crops.
So she thought, yes.
Yes. Well, a few years later, it became one of the largest oil fields in central Oklahoma, and which turned into major legal battles and fights that went all the way from the United States Court of Appeals to the U.S. Supreme Court in 1934. Subsequently, there was continual court battles, and the last one we just won in a major class action lawsuit that a major oil company in the United States, Sunoco Oil, lost their appeal in the United States Supreme Court, which the court affirmed the trial court's the trial court's judge trial, which awarded $151 million to the class action lawsuit. And that was just this past October.
Wow. And I've said wow several times because as you're talking, there's so much that we can unpeel and unpick just from that. I mean, it's not just about the settlement, but also the journey
Right.
of so many people as part of your own historical lineage and the impact this has had on you all up until now.
Right.
So can you just share a little bit about that personal journey for you as you've done your research as well?
Right. This is a period that my great-great-grandfather, Tal Jones, was sold away when he was 7 years old from his parents into another family, which the last name Jones is which is my mother's maiden name. That, of course, the slave took on the master's name. Subsequently, that was a long history with Tal that as a sharecropper after emancipation, which led him up to Oklahoma. And there he discovered he winds up becoming a part of Black Wall Street in Tulsa in terms of banking and other financial interests in real estate. And subsequently, the massacre that happened in 1921, he was one of the fortunate ones. Most of his assets were not tied to the banks in Tulsa that were Black owned because everybody lost everything in the massacre. From there, he had 11 children, and his youngest daughter, who helped him manage the oil fields as well as to deal with the legal aspect, she was one of the first Black women to attend the University of Oklahoma as well as Oklahoma State. And as I've spoken before on, she was not allowed in the classroom. She had to sit at her desk or her chair outside the classes to be able to attend those academic institutions. Subsequently, she became a very wealthy woman. She was the one in the family, because everyone got a portion of the oil in the family. And she bought up all of those portions from her brothers and sisters and wound up with a large share of mineral interests. Exetta, she was an entrepreneur in her day. And she had no children, and she left it to her niece, Dolores. Dolores, in the 1930s, went to this historical Black college in Texas called Wiley College. And then from there to Howard University, and a master's degree from the University of Southern California as well in the 1940s. Subsequently, Dolores had no children. And Dolores and my mother became close in later years. My mom came from Oklahoma at 18 with $25 and a suitcase and became a maid for June Lockhart. June Lockhart was the mother in Lassie. And from there, my mom became a personal assistant. I don't know in Britain if it came on here, Captain Kangaroo. And subsequently, she was his personal assistant on set, as well as handling other affairs. My mom then subsequently left there and became a part of William Morris Agency in black music, which at that time, and I think it's still, William Morris Agency is probably one of the largest in the world. It's here in London and California, or Los Angeles, or Beverly Hills. Well, to bring back
Yes.
Dolores, subsequently Dolores became very close to my mom and wound up living with my mom in her later age. She gave my mom all of her oil interests and mineral rights, which created nasty oil battles, family oil battles. But overall, in this American family saga, it has been very interesting in the research and being able to tell the stories, because we have a lot of people in the U.S. from Texas, Oklahoma, and Arkansas and Louisiana, that families had oil interests, and they either lost them by white takeovers, or the government taking it over as what is known as a quiet title, that someone basically files something to the court and runs an ad in the newspaper, and if you don't respond, then they can take your land.
Yeah.
So that goes on a lot.
But let me, if I may stop you for one moment, because there's been, what you've said is so loaded with so many things, and we can unpick this on so many levels. But what stood out from what you've just said are the women. I mean, I know the men had their place, but this is particularly about the women and, who they showed up to be entrepreneurs in spite of and despite of. So what do you feel, or what do you think from your research, and also, knowing your family, what was it that drove these women to become entrepreneurs, to do what they did in spite of all what they had to deal with, manage, go through, especially being not just women, but also black women?
Well, the Jones women, very, very strong women. As I spoke on Exetta, I spoke on Dolores. And my mom and all of her sisters, very strong. All of the women I have in my family, bootleggers that are women, that ran and sold alcohol. They were no-nonsense women. They did not believe in allowing their husbands to cheat on them. I have shared.
Some tried, though, you said.
Some very interesting stories.
Can you share a few of those now?
Yes,
Just add a little humor to this.
My Aunt Mamie, a bootlegger, very interesting woman. She didn't trust the banks. In her earlier years, she was married a couple of times. One of her husbands cheated on her. She caught him, and she waited till he got in the bathtub and dumped lye on him.
Can you just explain what lye is?
Lye is a chemical agent that you wash clothes and it'll eat away your skin.
And everything like a woman scorned, as they say.
Yes. She got away with it. Her punishment in the justice system was to take care of the man the rest of his life. But she was a known bootlegger. I was totally surprised that she got away with it. I can remember back in the 70s when she moved to California from Wewoka, and I will never forget this. I picked her up at American Airlines, my mom and I, and she says, "Go get my grip, son." A grip and means a suitcase.
Suitcase, yes.
And we get home, she opens it up, it was 400,000 in cash. And I was like, I couldn't believe it. But yes, Aunt Mamie was I was very close to her. And of course, my mom, let's see, Aunt Mamie was my mom's father's sister.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And my mom was a pretty tough cookie herself. My dad was a cheater, a real cheater. And somehow he thought that me being 5 or 6 years old, that I didn't know what he was doing. But he failed to realize that my mother had more influence over me than him. And moms would put me in the car and direct me to point how to get where he was with his girlfriends. Well, I can recall once that we got to this house that I showed her how to get to, and she got out and put her key in to see if the door would open. And from there, Mom's left and went and got one of her friends who has a cement truck, and she had him to pour cement in his convertible Cadillac. And I just couldn't believe it. 20 years later, I asked my dad, I said, "Did you ever figure out who did that?" And he said, "Yeah, I saw her do it." And I asked him, I said, "Well, why didn't you come out and say something?" Because I was sitting there. He says, "Anybody would pour cement in a car must have a gun." So, my mom, she was very, very interesting in that time. I mean, after their divorce, she would go by and different women that she might catch there. I can recall once he was going to Las Vegas for the weekend, was supposed to take care of me for the weekend. And she said, "Well, go on, you guys have a good time." And she goes back and breaks a little window and puts the water hose in the house and turns it on for the whole weekend. So, I mean, there's interesting stories, but my mother was a great entrepreneur. After leaving the William Morris Agency, she opened up a nightclub in Los Angeles that was probably one of the largest black nightclubs in the 1960s. She would have entertainment from Tina Turner or Ike and Tina Turner at the time. She had B.B. King, Aretha Franklin, Smokey Robinson, Etta James, and and that lasted for about 10 years. And from that experience, she went into another entrepreneur area of opening up one of the first stores in Los Angeles for black women, full-figured wear.
Excellent.
And they didn't have that in the 70s, that dedicated to full figure. And it became a very lucrative business because she focused strictly on church wear. And the mega churches it was absolutely amazing. But in terms of the family genealogy, I have really been very active in the search in terms of my family on the Jones side. And earlier, I was speaking to Esther about genealogy on another side of my mom's side. Great-grandfather, the family was slaves to Native Americans. And most people didn't realize in America that the Indians had black slaves.
Yeah.
Well, I hired Ancestry.com to verify on the Tal Jones side, and then to verify a few things. And they came up with something that absolutely blew my mind. That the chief of the Choctaw Nation, Native American tribe, was white and Native American. And he had either an affair with my great-great-grandmother, or, of course, as a slave, nothing is consensual. You have no choice. Well, I started to trace that backwards. And what I came up with, okay, on the Native American side, of course, they were traced back to 1500s of New France, which is Quebec now. Okay, on the white side, it traces to the Mayflower, all the way back to England, all the way to the 15th century. I started to dig up earls, dukes, sirs, viscounts, and I said, wow. So now I've devoted my research to start to research those that I found in the 1500s to bring them to present day on this side of the Atlantic to say, aha!
So open up a can of worms.
I've opened up to open up a can of worms to show that you do have black ancestors over here. But also in my research, I have also on the black side developed a lot of genealogy documentation in reference to getting to the African side. It's hard to go back further than the 1600s or 1700s. But the DNA shows.
Why is that? Is it because that they didn't document?
Right.
You know.
Okay, I can go to as far as Ghana. I could, when I went to Ghana, I tried to search. Well, I can go to the tribe, but I can't go any further than the tribe by DNA. Even where the slave ships came from at Cape Coast in Ghana, it's no documentation there. The documentation will be Barbados. It will be in Jamaica. Normally the slave ships went to Barbados first, and then it dispersed to Virginia or to Georgia or to New Orleans. And that's where it kind of stops. There's no documentation in the Middle Passage.
But remember when we were talking earlier, the documentation that they do have on slaves was...
Okay, the documentation in America is when they sold them and they collected taxes on them. Or some of the prominent insurance companies and banks, for instance, Chase Bank financed slaves. New York Mutual financed slaves. Lloyd's of London insured slaves. And those are these great institutions that are around. I think more so than the government, some of them owe reparations versus the government, because they became very rich in the 1700s and the 1800s from slavery. And slaves were treated, of course, as property, and were very, very valuable. The plantation that Tal Jones came from, they had over 600 slaves on the plantation. And slaves were very valuable at that time.
Yes.
And then after slavery ended, guess what? The United States government paid the planters reparation because they freed the slaves. And now when we are asking for reparation, it's an issue behind it.
But let's just dissect some of that as well.
Okay.
Because you said that you're calling this an American story rather than a Black story.
Right.
Why is that? Because you spoke so much about slavery and the impact of being slaves, and what you're doing as part of your documentation and your research, and also the docu-series that that you're working on, and the book. You're bringing these people to life. You're giving them a name. You're giving them, there's that saying, I am a man. I am a man. And so what you're doing, you're now giving your ancestors that sort of interface. Say, we were here and we mattered and I am a man. So why would you then say this is an American story, not a Black story?
Okay. I believe when you take it as a Black story, it will not mainstream in sales in America. If you take it as an American story, it makes it where it opens up the door for all to be able to share the knowledge with all. It's sort of like music. If it's R&B, well, it's limited. But if it's crossover, it's an American and UK story, or sales, basically. But if it's Black sales, it's going to be limited. Okay, but it's not all about sales. It's all about the history being told and shared. Because right now we're going through a crisis at home of culture wars. And culture wars, they're trying to eliminate certain literature, particularly Black literature, that will be in schools. We're going through the issue in culture wars of how we teach Black history.
Still.
Yes. And in Florida, the governor says that it shouldn't be taught in public schools because it's not history.
So what is it? I mean, so what is it then? I mean, has he defined what it is?
Well, I think it's more extremism. He hasn't defined it. This is a man who's at war with Mickey Mouse. This is a man that, in terms of choice, a woman having a choice is almost zero in Florida. So I'm an advocate that the story is an American story, that I want it to be shared across America and across the UK as well, or our other Caribbean nations, because they suffered the same history as we have. And my comparatives with Black issues here in the UK are basically at the same level. They may be a little 10 years behind, but the issues are the same.
Okay, so in terms of what the work that you're doing, the work that you're presenting, your project, how do you think that's going to redefine how not only Blacks, African Americans, I'm trying to use the right terminology, look at themselves, but also you said you want it to be for everyone. So even those who are extremists or white, I'm trying to find the right terminology, so apologies. So how do you think your body of work is going to help to redefine that?
Well, I think that talking about genealogy or talking about Black history in America, the Caribbean, or even here in Europe is very important, because if you don't know your history, you don't know how to go forward. And everybody has a story in their history. Everybody in this room has a story about their family. And initially, some issues in your family are not too proud of. But you know what? The next generation that looks at it says, "Wow, that was auntie and uncle were great." Because to me, all of my family members that in the past, when I read about them or stumble on things, and I said, "Wow, okay, I really am proud," and they're very. It's just very important to me. And then also, when you do search your family history, you're going to find out a lot of things were stolen from them. If it was land, and I don't know here about land, but in America, the ownership of land identifies who you are. You know, with land, you have power. Yeah. And that's so important. And a lot of people lost their lands just on, as I said, quiet titles, eminent domains, the government taking it. So focusing on your past, it also teaches you how to maintain what you have today.
Brilliant, brilliant. And in winding down, Bernard, I should call you Dr. Bernard Moore. In winding down, how has working on this project impacted on you personally, with all the findings and knowing, especially with the women coming through, you know, what they became and what they represented, but more so, can you tell us about when the book's going to come out and the docuseries? So that's a nice
Well,
thing.
the book will probably be out in January. The TV miniseries is in development, and hopefully it'll be through a major streaming production company. Yes. And how I got into this?
Or how it impacted you?
It has impacted me greatly. I started this out with grief from the passing of my mother. And just reflecting on some of the things that she told me and my grandparents that I shared. So it was mainly a reflection of people that I was very close to, remembering the stories and then trying to verify them. You know, it was like one story. I had always heard that my great-great-grandfather wrote the song "Swing Low, Sweet Charity." And
see, there's so much. You know, this is going to be a part 2, part 3, part 4. Coming soon, people. Coming soon.
So, as I said, I have learned so much over the years that is just amazing. Yeah.
Brilliant, brilliant. Well, as I was jesting earlier, this is going to take a part 2, a part 3, a part 4, but this gives you an initial insight into the story that we're going to hear from Dr. Bernard Moore about not just his life, not just his family history, not just his genealogy, but something that's really going to impact the world on lots of different levels, especially when you do that other tracing to the UK and Scotland. So watch out, all you dukes and duchesses. But Dr. Bernard, I'd like to say thank you so much for your time. Thank you for sharing. And I wasn't joking when I said about part 2, 3, and 4, as I say, coming soon. So thank you for being on The Sofa with Esther.
Thank you for having me.